Now that the regular season is over, we've learned a lot about these players over the course of this year, but there's some that over the past few weeks or over the past month have really gained significant value compared to what we saw from them early on in the season. I'm going to give you 4 guys right now that I think are going to go a little higher in drafts than they would have if the season would have ended after week 14. First one, and probably the most significant riser of this group, Jalen McMillan. Jalen McMillan, he came in, he kind of became the third receiver behind Mike Evans and behind Chris Godwin. But when Chris Godwin went down, it looked like an opportunity for him to really step up. Problem was, Jalen McMillan also got hurt himself, and his first couple games back were, well, not very exciting. He only had 2 targets for 1 reception and 3 targets for 2 receptions in his first 2 games back. And that kind of lined up with how the rest of his season had gone, where he hadn't had a single game all season where he broke 35 yards. However, something happened there when they played the Las Vegas Raiders that changed the trajectory of his season and even probably his career. Over the last 5 weeks of his season, he had over 50 yards in every single game. Target-wise, he had 6 or more targets in every single game except 1, and he had 5 in that game. But this is the capper. He scored a touchdown in every single game, and in fact, in those 5 games, 7 touchdown receptions in a 5-game stretch. The biggest part of this is I think the Buccaneers can now say, we don't necessarily have to pay significant money to Chris Godwin. We can still get good production out of this player paired with Mike Evans. So now he's moved into what I would believe the wide receiver 2 role on this team. I would now be looking to take him significantly higher than I would before. Around week 14, I wouldn't have wanted to take him nearly as high. I would have been looking rounds probably 14, 15 in my startup drafts. He's moved way up for me to where I'm looking to probably take him somewhere in rounds 8 or 9. Man, for a second, I thought this guy was not going to give us anything anymore, and that was Tyjae Spears. Coming into the season, it was like, okay, it's going to be 1A, 1B with Tony Pollard. Nope, it was just Tony Pollard is the clear A, and Tyjae Spears is the clear B. However, when Tony Pollard missed a little bit of time, well, now Tyjae Spears had the opportunity to show out a little bit. Over his last 3 weeks of the weeks that he played anyway, his last 3 weeks of the season, he showed us quite a bit in those games. 27.2 points, 21.6 points, and 13.3 points. Lots done in the receiving game especially. So Tyjae Spears, where he originally kind of looked like a guy that was just destined to be a clear backup, showed that he can average over 20 points a game when he gets the work, when he gets the opportunity. And it'll be really interesting to see how this plays off this year, because Tony Pollard, while he does still have a contract for this year, this may have opened some eyes on how this team might want to utilize these running backs a little bit more, similar to what they did in Cincinnati, where the running backs are extension of the passing game. I could see Tyjae Spears much more involved next year in this Callahan offense. So I'd be looking to take him in roughly round 9 of a current startup. The most expensive guy in this group that I would be looking to take at the end of my 4th round, beginning of my 5th round, would be Michael Penix Jr. Over his last 3 games of the season, he threw for over 775 yards, 3 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. Those numbers aren't eye-popping, but especially this last game of the season, we saw him be able to sling it out and duel against another quarterback and lead a team down to a touchdown drive at the end of the game, which was incredibly impressive. Now, fortunately, he didn't get a chance to get the ball in overtime, but when you look at all of the options in this offense, from in the running game, Bijan Robinson and Drake London, and as much as he hasn't been very good, Kyle Pitts is still a potential weapon for a quarterback, even though he's not much of a fantasy option anymore. Michael Penix, it's the perfect scenario. He showed us enough. So if you're paying attention, he showed enough to say, hey, I can be a legitimate starting quarterback and a little legitimate fantasy football quarterback in super flex leagues, but he didn't put up such outrageous numbers that it totally skyrocketed his price. For me, like I said, I'm looking to take him at the end of the 4th, beginning of the 5th round in my super flex tight end premium drafts. Last one, another guy that, man, all season he did absolutely nothing. Going into the middle of November, did not have a single game where he eclipsed 20 receiving yards. But Sean Payton started to believe a little bit more and a little bit more in Marvin Mims, his second-round pick from a year ago, and man, did that start to pay off. Every single game that he had at the end of the season, so that would have been 6 of his last 7 games, he had over 40 yards in those games, had 2 games where he had over 100 receiving yards, and he had 6 touchdown receptions towards the end of the season there. So lots of really good production from Marvin Mims, especially in a scenario where this team is kind of looking at, hey, Bo Nix is our starting quarterback. That's established now. What are we going to do with Courtland Sutton, though? Probably bringing him back. But this team has a lot of other needs, particularly looking at the running back position and some of the spots on the defensive side of the football. Marvin Mims might have done enough to secure himself that wide receiver 2 role. Now, while there's still a lot to be seen, and I don't want to lock that in as a sure thing, he's one of those high upside players that I'm looking to take a little bit later on in my drafts, to where he would have originally been a 20-something round pick. I'm now looking to move him up, and I'm looking kind of in that, looking at my wide receiver 5 or 6. So that would mean I'm probably looking at him in the 12th, 13th type of round as a really high upside player in my upcoming drafts this year.